Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my Bible study. This is week two. We'll walk through the Bible. I'm happy that you're here. Last week we saw how God created the world and how sin entered the world through Adam and Eve and how that separated man from God. And then how God faithfully saved a few through Noah after the flood, Noah and his sons. Um, and today we're going to move forward in a story to a man God chose to begin a new chapter of his plan. His name is Abram, but later God calls him Abraham, and you may know him as Abraham, but um, we're going to call him Abram for now. So Abram's story is the foundation of showing us the faithfulness and what faith looks like when God calls us to the unknown, when he calls us to do something. In the lineage from Noah to Abraham, we went through the lineage from all the way from Adam to his son Seth to Noah, and now we're looking at Noah to Abraham. So in Genesis 11:10 through 26, you can read all this lineage, and there's several generations. I won't read all their names, but so from Shem, and I told you to remember Noah's son Shem last week. So that's where this the line of descendants leading to Abraham comes from Shem. So just reading the verses, like before I said, if you just open to chapter 11, verse 10 and start reading, this seems boring. And this is how I missed it. I didn't know that Abraham come from Shem, and this line continued through Abraham, and eventually this line will continue to lead to Jesus. So this genealogy would have really mattered to the people at the time of where Abraham came from, what his lineage was, and so it should matter to us too. And we can see God's faithfulness through this family line. In Genesis 12, God calls Abram to leave his family, leave his country, leave his house, and take his family. He promises that he's going to make him a great nation, that he's going to bless him, and that he's going to make his name great. So Abraham travels with his wife, Sarai. You may know her as Sarah, but in the beginning, her name was Sarai. He later changes her name as well to Sarah. And he takes his nephew Lot, and they travel to Canaan. Well, while they're there in Canaan, God tells Abraham that he's going to give this land to his children. Well, Abraham knows he doesn't have any children and he's pretty old. And the land is inhabited right at the time with Canaanites. And so you can imagine him wondering, but he's faithful. He believes what God is saying. And so they leave Canaan and continue on. They continue on to Negeb. And they can't stay there long because there's a famine in the land. And so think about this. God has called Abraham to leave his home and his country and take his family. And he's just going to tell him where he's got to go. He doesn't tell him right then. He tells him as he goes. And he's got to have faith that God is going to lead him step by step. But then there's a famine in the land as well. So this shows us that God may call us to something. It may call us to do something, but it doesn't always mean it's going to be easy. But we've got to continue to have faith in his plan, faith in God, and faith in his provisions for us. So because of the famine, Abraham takes his family to Egypt, where he makes the mistake of misleading the leader, Pharaoh, by telling him that Sarai is his sister, not his wife. And the reason Abraham tells him this is because he's afraid that she's so beautiful, he's afraid that someone will kill him over her. So he tells Sarah, don't do me a favor, tell everybody that you're my sister. But and because Pharaoh thinks he's taken Abraham's sister, he gives him all kinds of livestock, cattle and sheep, and gives him maidservants and male servants. But no man can uh, mess up God's plan. God has a plan. He has a plan for Sarai. And so God brings a plague on Pharaoh's house because he's taken Sarah into his house and tells Pharaoh, this is Abraham's wife. And so Pharaoh confronts Abraham and says, "Why did you do this to me? Why would you tell me she's your sister? Take your belongings, take everything you've got and your family, and please leave, leave." So they travel back through Negev, back to Bethel. This same situation happens later again in Genesis 20 with a king Abimelech. And I remember reading these at different times and going, did I read this somewhere else? Did this happen to someone else? I thought I was confused, but it did. It happened several times. And in Genesis 12:20, verse 12, it actually reveals that Sarai is Abraham's half sister. The verse says that she is my father's daughter, but not my mother's daughter. So it's his half sister. Ugh. All right. So he misleads them, but really it is a sister too. So Genesis 15, God creates his covenant with Abraham and promises him a son. So Genesis 15, 4 and 5 says, "Your very own son will be your heir." And God brought him outside and said, "Look to the heaven and number the stars, if you're able to number them." Then he said to Abraham, "So shall your offspring be." So he's telling him he's going to have so many children that he will not be able to count them. And knowing that he's old and Sarai is past childbearing years, but Abraham still trusts God. He still trusts in the Lord. And so, continuing in chapter 15, we're going to talk about a prophecy. And I just want to say that prophecy is a message from God. It's given through a person to guide his people. It's not complicated, it's not mystical. It's God speaking to his people through his servant. And a prophet is a person chosen by God to deliver that message to his people. And you can say there's prophets today, but they don't speak with the same authority as Isaiah and Jeremiah because they're giving revelation from God. God is not speaking revelation to people today. Prophets today are someone who boldly speaks God's word, and uh, they're not giving any new messages from God. Rather, they're proclaiming the message already given. So now that we've got that straight, we're going to talk about, let me just read you the prophecy in Genesis 15, 13 through 14. Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners," meaning foreigners, "in the land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring a judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions." So this is a prophecy hundreds of years before it happened of the Israelites' exodus out of Egypt. And so in Genesis 16, Sarah and Hagar. So Abraham, we talked about how he trusts God. He trusts God, what God's telling him, and he just keeps his faith in him. But Sarah, being past childbearing years, she just knows this is not going to happen. She just feels it's not going to happen. She doesn't have the faith. So she takes things into all her own hands. And she said, "Well, if we're going to have a lot of children, we've got to start somehow. So I'm going to give my maidservant Hagar to Abraham, and she can have a child for him." So sometimes we can't or don't understand God's plan, and then we try to make things happen by trying to figure out on our own understanding of how we can help God make it happen. And this just shows us that God's ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And so she makes a mistake by giving Hagar to Abraham, and she does have a son, and they call him Ishmael. But God tells Abraham, "You're going to have your own son. You're this." The son I told you that you're going to have with Sarah is his name's going to be Isaac. And Abraham asked God to bless Ishmael, and God does. God says, I will bless him, but he and his and Hagar have to go away because my covenant is going to be with Isaac. And so in Genesis 19, Lot and Abraham left Egypt, and where they were near Bethel, they had so many animals and livestock that the grass, the grazing, and the water resources couldn't hold them, couldn't support them both. So they split up. And Abraham says, Lot, you pick where you want to go. I'm gonna let you choose. And so Lot sees the valley near the Jericho, I think it's the Jericho, or the Jordan River. That's what it is, the Jordan River, and uh, thinks that's going to be the best place for him. And so they split up. Well, where Lot really ends up is in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? That's where this is located. And if you know that story, it's in chapter 19 where God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah for being so evil. If you read these verses and you study the history behind it, they were doing some horrible, evil things. But Abraham knows Lot is there, and Abraham pleads with God and says, God, surely you would destroy the city and destroy the righteous people right along with the evil people. If there's 50 righteous people there, will you spare the city? And God says, yes, if there's 50 righteous people, I will spare Sodom and Gomorrah. Um, but then Abraham continues to negotiate. He says, well, what if there's only 45? And then he says 30 and then 20 and then finally 10. He said, God, if there's 10 righteous people, will you spare the city? And God says, yes, if there's 10 righteous people, I will spare the cities. Well, they don't find 10 people, but God does spare Lot and his family. He gives them a chance. He sends two angels to Lot and says, the city's going to be destroyed. You've got to leave now. Well, Lot's son-in-laws won't leave. I don't know if they think he's joking or not being serious. But Lot takes his children and wife and starts to leave. And God says, leave and don't look back. But Lot's wife looks back and she's turned to a pillar of salt. So this just leaves Lot and his daughters. And so this next part's a little bit uncomfortable, but it is the facts and it's part of the story. So Lot and his daughters have to hide out in the mountains in a cave. So they're hiding. And the daughters are saying, we're never going to meet anybody here and have our own children. So they devise a plan to get their father Lot drunk and sleep with him. And so they both do. And they both have a son. And the oldest daughter has a son, and she names him Moab, and he becomes the father of the Moabites. And the younger daughter's son, his name is Ben-Ammi, and he's the father of the Ammonites. And so I've heard in sermons about uh, the Moabites and the Ammonites, but I didn't know where they came from. But you may not have either, and now you know. So that's why it's important for us to put things in chronological order. So when we do get to the Ammonites, we can go, I know where they come from. Um, so some of the challenges we've talked about that Abraham faced, he's traveling through land that's occupied. God tells him he's going to give the land to his children, and he don't have any children, and it's occupied. There's a famine in the land where he's traveled. That's got to be really hard. And the fear of being killed and the danger in Egypt. But yet Abraham is faithful and he trusts God in leading him. And this just shows us that even people of great faith make mistakes, and God's faithfulness doesn't depend on our perfection. We are going to sin, we're going to fall short of the glory of God. So we're going to move on to chapter Genesis 22. This is God tests Abraham. Him is going to be a multitude, more children than he can count, more offspring than he can count. And God tells him, I want you to take him up on the mountain and sacrifice him. He's going to be the sacrifice. Abraham obeys God, completely trusting him. And at the last moment, God provides a ram as a substitute. But can you imagine as they're traveling, Abraham telling Isaac, we're going to go make a sacrifice to the Lord. But Isaac saying, well, we're not taking a goat or a sheep or a lamb with us. What are we going to use? Why aren't we taking anything? And you can imagine Abraham, Abraham does tell him God will provide. But what is Abraham thinking? Is he thinking, yeah, God's going to provide because he's told me it's going to be you? Or is he thinking, no, I know God's going to provide something else? We don't know what he was thinking. But when you read in the Bible, that's why it's so good to ask questions and think about their situation and at the time, what they might have been thinking. It really puts you in the story. So this week shows us that God chooses ordinary people like me. Um, he chooses people that, and you see this all throughout the Bible, that don't feel they're adequate, that have issues, that don't speak eloquently, that don't have a lot of knowledge, that have physical ailments. But he doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. So I'm trying to be faithful and doing this Bible study. I want you to continue to pray for me that I will be able to deliver His words. And um, like I said, this week shows us that God keeps His promises, and even the faithful make mistakes, and I will make mistakes. And if I do make a mistake in telling you something, if anyone points that out or I find out later that I've made a mistake, I will certainly correct myself and let you know where I've made a mistake. So God's plan is going to continue through Abraham's family. And so Abraham's story really sets the stage for the entire nation of Israel and ultimately for Jesus. So next week, we're going to talk about Isaac and Jacob and the 12 tribes of Israel. So I know we've gotten a lot of information in the last 2 weeks, but it's really going to get good next week because Abraham had Isaac, and then Isaac has had Jacob, and we're going to talk more in detail about Jacob and the issues that surround him and the 12 tribes of Israel. I've heard of the 12 tribes of Israel, but I didn't know where they came from. I didn't until now, and I'm going to share that with you, and you're going to know where the 12 tribes come from. And it's really amazing how it fits together. So I'm looking forward to next week, and I pray that you will look back in your Bible and read some of the stories that we talked about today to get a little bit more information about them, because of course all I did was just highlight it a little bit. We don't have time to go in depth in the story, so just pick a few out that we talked about and read there. And I hope God blesses you and keeps you. I'll see you next week. Thank you.